What if the monkey discovered the real reason why the US debt is never paid off? Look, I need to tell you something that will blow your mind and probably completely change how you see the global financial system. Because what I discovered about American debt isn't just surprising, it's absolutely disturbing. Have you ever stopped to think about why the United States, being the largest economy on the planet, the country everyone looks to as a benchmark of power and wealth, carries a debt of over $35 trillion and nobody seems really worried about it? Like, if you or I owed even 1% of that to the bank, we'd be completely broke, desperate, selling everything we own. But the US just keeps spending, printing money, and acting as if that absurd mountain of debt is just an irrelevant detail. Doesn't that bother you? Doesn't it set off a giant red light in your mind? Because it should, and the real reason behind it is much darker and more ingenious than any conspiracy theory you've ever heard. The truth is that American debt was never meant to be repaid. And that's not a bug in the system, my friend. That's precisely the main feature, the intentional design of this entire global financial circus. Let me explain something that traditional economists won't tell you with such clarity. The US dollar hasn't been backed by gold since 1971, when Nixon simply decided he wouldn't exchange dollars for gold anymore, and that was it, the gold standard ended. Since that historical moment, the value of the dollar has been based purely on trust, on faith, on a collective promise that that piece of green paper is worth something. But here's the key point, the brilliant and perverse insight at the same time. This trust doesn't come from thin air. It comes from the fact that the whole world needs to use dollars to buy oil, to conduct international trade, to hold reserves in central banks. The United States managed to transform its currency into a global necessity, and when you have a monopoly on the demand for your currency, you can do something extraordinary and frightening at the same time. You can print money to pay your debts without suffering the consequences that any other country would suffer. Imagine if Brazil tried to do that, printing reais recklessly to pay its debt. It would be instant hyperinflation, total economic chaos. But the US routinely does this through the Federal Reserve, buying its own debt securities in a scheme that in any other context would be called a Ponzi scheme. Now comes the part that will really blow your mind. Who are the biggest creditors of the United States? You probably imagine it's China, right? Everyone talks about China buying American debt, but the reality is even more bizarre because the biggest creditor of the US is the American government itself, especially through the Social Security Trust Fund and other government funds, followed by the Federal Reserve, which, as I said simply, creates money out of thin air to buy these bonds. It's a perfect circular system where the government owes itself money, prints that money, and everyone continues to believe that it has value because there is no viable alternative in the global market. China, Japan, and other countries hold trillions in American bonds, not because they blindly trust the US, but because they are trapped in this system. Because their own economies depend on exporting to Americans who pay in dollars, which they need to reinvest in something and us. Treasury bonds are considered the safest asset in the world, not because they are actually safe, but because they are the least risky in a world full of even greater risks. The real secret, the reason why this debt will never be paid, is that paying it would destroy the very system that keeps the United States at the top of the global hierarchy. If they actually started paying the debt, they would have to stop printing money, drastically cut spending, reduce the role of the dollar in the world, and that would mean losing the exorbitant privilege of being able to finance their lifestyle, their gigantic army, their global political influence, all with a currency they control and can manipulate. Debt is, in fact, a tool of power, not a problem to be solved. As long as the world needs dollars, as long as oil is priced in dollars, as long as international reserves are mostly in dollars, the United States can continue expanding its debt, indefinitely exporting its inflation to the rest of the world, making everyone pay for the American party. It's a modern imperial system where, instead of conquering territories with armies, you conquer economies with currency and debt. And here's the disturbing conclusion to this whole story. We, the rest of the world, are unwitting accomplices in this scheme because our economies, our governments, our central banks are all tied to this system in a way that makes it impossible to get out of it without causing an even greater collapse. It's like being in a sinking ship where everyone knows it's going down, but nobody wants to be the first to jump, because there's nowhere to go. The American debt will never be paid off because it was never meant to be paid off. It's the very fuel that powers the American global power machine, and as long as that machine works, as long as the world accepts this game, the debt will only grow more and more until something finally breaks down, or until a real alternative emerges that challenges the dollar's dominance. Now tell me in the comments, do you think this system will eventually collapse, or will the US manage to keep this scheme running forever? Subscribe to the channel for more content that debunks the official narrative of the global economy, and leave a like if you finally understand why the world's largest economy is also the most indebted and doesn't even care.